What's up guys, I'm James, welcome back to Kit Guru. MSI is celebrating its 35th birthday this year, which is a bit depressing for me because it means I've been around for 5-6 years, longer than MSI, which makes me feel really old. But MSI is celebrating by launching a load of new products, and we've got a few of those here to have a look at today. So we've got this new MSI MPG Quietude 100S case. So not sure what quietude means. It obviously means it must be quiet, but it's got a bit of attitude as well at the same time. Not sure. That's a bit of a strange name for a case, but whatever. We've also got a new all-in-one CPU cooler, the MPG CoreLiquid S360, and there's also some new fans as well. So these are the MPG Silent Gale P12. They've all got a similar theme going on, these parts, and they're all based around low noise and silent operation. So let's have a look at this case first. It's a standard mid-tower ATX case, supports motherboards up to eATX, so that means eATX, ATX, micro ATX and mini ITX boards. On the side we've got a tempered glass panel that is in a hinge, so it's nice and easy to open, and it latches with a magnet. Not that easy to get off though, it's quite stiff on the hinge, so you have to get hold of it from underneath and give it a bit of a tug to come off, and you can see it's got a slight tint to it, but it's not too dark. The MPG Quietude 100S is due to launch around late October to early November in the UK. It's going to be priced at $129.99, and the main features of this case are low noise and kind of silent operation of the system. So you've got various panels that are removable, such as this top one, and these are insulated with that bitumen soundproofing insulation that you generally see on cases. Also the front panel is removable as well, just slots out, and again that has the bitumen soundproofing on there. Behind there as well you've got a dust filter which is also removable, clips in at the top and lifts out, and you can see there's a fine woven fabric mesh on that dust filter. Then you can see behind that we've got a nice big opening for radiators up to 360mm in the front. Obviously you can also fit a 240, 280 or a 120 in there as well if you want. This front panel also removes, a bit of a tug, and it's got a connection at the bottom there, because on the bottom of this case there's a bit of a RGB light in there, and that connects here to these contacts. That's the front panel. I put the front panel back on again. Just clips on quite easily. You can see when we put the dust filter back in, that clips in place. And then this outer front panel, that just slots in at the bottom, and then it's magnetic. So because it's kind of a silence focus case, we've got a pretty close front panel. There's a small air vent down there which is only about 10 or 15mm wide. Down this edge here we've got a quite decent 25mm air vent as well. And also if I just flip the case over, you can see in the top as well there's another air vent there, again about 25 to 30mm wide. It might be slightly restricted for airflow at the front, but it's probably better than some cases that don't have much air vents at the side, so it should have some room to breathe. But we'll have a look, see what thermals are like later. We'll do a bit of testing on this case and see how the thermals perform, and the noise levels obviously as well, with this being a low noise focus case. If you want, once you've removed that top panel, MSI does provide one of these little perforated metal mesh magnetic dust filters that you could put on the top, although you generally use that as an exhaust if you've got an AO or some fans at the top, so might not be necessary. Also on the top panel you've got this front side I/O connectivity. So on here you've got a power button, also got a fan speed control button. This has 3 different stages to it. You can switch between 50%, 70% or 100% fan speed. You've also got a 3.5mm audio jack for headphones, one for microphone, 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A ports, a single USB 3.2 Gen 2 by 2 Type C port, and then also you've got an LED button up there which switches through the various different RGB patterns and colours. Also on this top panel you can install up to a 360mm radiator inside. Again, that also includes a 280, 240 or even a 120. So Looks like it's got decent cooling support. As well as the radiators, you can also fit up to 7 fans in this case, so you're 3 in the front, 3 in the top, and then 1 in the rear. Flip the case around the other way. To remove this side panel, it's just 2 thumb screws, slide it backwards and that comes out, and you can see again this steel side panel has got this bitumen sound insulation on it. Inside the case, it's a pretty typical layout. There's no 5 1/4 inch drive base, so as I've said up front, you can get up to a 360mm radiator, top 360 as well. Full cover power supply shroud. It has got a vent on here, so you could run your power supply with the fan either facing up or facing down. 3 cutouts for cable management on top of the power supply shroud. They've got grommets in, another 2 up the side of the motherboard tray, again with rubber grommets, and then 3 along the top, all with rubber grommets in there. You can also see here there's 2 2.5 inch SSD mounts, but they'll mount on the back side of the motherboard tray. And we've also got a feature that I think should be in just about every case that's, you know, gaming related or, you know, going to be used with a discrete graphics card. You've got a VGA support bracket. I just did a review on a DeepCool case. DeepCool used to include the VGA support bracket with their cases, but this last case that I reviewed didn't have it for some reason, and I was annoyed about that. But MSI has decided to add one in their case, so we've got a VGA support bracket, and it just loosens off with a thumb screw at the back. You can just move that up and down to wherever the graphics card is, put it in position, and then just tighten it up, and then your graphics card sits on that, and it takes up any sag in the graphics card. So nice to see that. Also on this power supply shroud, we've got a second RGB zone. So this strip you can see here, that lights up in RGB, and that should be synchronized with the light LED bar under the front panel. That one at the front will give it some kind of underglow. We'll have that connected up later when we do a build. Around the back, as I've already mentioned, there's 2 2.5 inch SSD mounts here. There's also 2 removable drive sleds as well. They take 2.5 inch. They just slide out and slide back in on rubber grommets, so plenty of 2.5 inch storage. And if you want additional storage down at the bottom, you've got another 3.5 inch drive bay that slides out. You could also fit a 2.5 inch drive in there as well. And the screw holes on the top of that, so you might also be able to fit a 3.5 inch drive on the top as well. You can see underneath the power supply shroud there's some rubber, or I think it's actually foam there to take up any possible vibrations and noise from the power supply. Just flip this over, you can see there are some feet on the case which lift it up about 20mm. There's some rubber feet on there as well. There's some screws there as well, so it looks like you can remove that 3.5 inch drive bay if you need. And there's also a dust filter that slides out from the back, and that just stops any dust going into the power supply. As I've already mentioned, we've got some RGB in this, and we also have a RGB hub. It's an RGB hub and a fan hub, so you can see it already comes with the 2 zones connected up. You can connect some more RGB there as well, and I guess we should be able to synchronize this either with the motherboard or use the RGB switch on the top of the case. One thing I've seen is that fan cable's a bit stretched. Don't really like that. That could have done with being a bit longer, so you could be routed around here a bit neater. So I might put an extension on that when I do a build, but that's not a big deal. As you might have noticed as well, inside the back of this case, so acting as an exhaust, is a 120mm fan. That comes pre-installed, and that is one of MSI's new Meg Silent Gale P12 fan. Silent Gale P12 are also low noise or silent focused fans. They have a speed range of 0 to 2000 RPM, controlled by PWM. They have a 32-degree angled fan blade to maximize airflow, a hydrodynamic bearing, anti-vibration gaskets on the 4 mounting points, and an angled and curved frame to minimize turbulence and enhance static pressure. These fans will be priced at $39 in the US. We don't actually have a UK price just yet because these are not due to land in the UK until Q1 of next year. And that leaves us with this, which is the Meg CoreLiquid S360. This is a 360mm AAO. Again, it's low noise or silent operation focus. That's what all these parts are about. This has been designed in partnership with Acertech. It uses a 7th generation Acertech pump. This is also available in a 280mm version. Obviously that'll come with 240mm fans, but this 360, this comes with 3 of these Silent Gale P12 120mm fans. These can be configured in the MSI Center software to have a 0 RPM profile. So I think what happens with that is once the CPU reaches 80 degrees, the fans spin up, but anything below 80 degrees, they're completely silent because they're not spinning at all. So they're interesting. They're actually really nice, solid looking fans, these. Something I've noticed, which is a bit strange these days, is there's no RGB lighting. So I quite like that. I really like the stealthy look of these fans, and they do feel like quality. They're very solid, rigid frames, seem to have a really smooth bearing. They look nice. I like the look of those. So the cooler itself, as I mentioned earlier, it's an Acertech Generation 7 pump. 27mm thick radiator, I think, aluminium radiator, braided sleeving. Down at the bottom of the hoses at the CPU end, you've got these articulating 90-degree fittings that you can move into position. Probably noticed that it's quite a large unit, this, and that's because it's got quite a few features built into the CPU block. So on top there is a 2.4-inch IPS panel hidden underneath this like mirror finish top cover that just fits on by magnets. There you can see the IPS display, and on here you can have like customized images, text. You could have like a GIF or a video playing. You can also get live weather reports on here as well, and you can also use this for displaying hardware information. I don't know whether you can see underneath that there's also a fan. So that's a 60mm fan, and that's like a downdraft fan, which should help cool the VRM and other surrounding components. That's interesting, but what it does do is it makes the CPU block quite tall. It's probably one of the tallest AIO CPU blocks I've seen. As typical with Acertech, it's a circular copper cold plate, and it comes with the thermal compound pre-applied and comes with the Intel bracket fitted. And as usual, it's just a twist fit. You've also got quite a bunch of cables attached to this CPU block, so cable management is going to be quite interesting. You've got a serial ATA power to power the unit, USB connection there that goes to a USB header. Obviously that must be to communicate with the MSI Center software. 3 fan connections there, so it looks like the fans on the radiator connect up to the CPU block. Obviously again, that's so that you can control the fan speed through the MSI Center, and then there's another fan header that will go to the CPU fan header on the motherboard. The MPG CoreLiquid S360, that is going to be launched in the UK, I think in early November, and that is priced at $249.99. So it looks like we've got some interesting new parts to work with here. I think what we'll do, instead of doing like an in-depth technical review on each one of these bits, I think what I'm going to do is like a low noise MSI theme build and do a bit of testing on the case, see what it's like in terms of thermals and noise levels in various different configurations. So like with this front panel installed and removed, see what difference that makes. Same with this top panel. I'm going to be using a MSI Mag B550 Tomahawk motherboard. CPU is an AMD Ryzen 5 5600X, and then for graphics I'm going to use the MSI Radeon RX 6600 XT Gaming X. Got 2 drives for storage, so for the operating system I'm going to use this Corsair MP600 PCIe Gen 4, and then for additional storage I'm going to use this Kioxia XG6P. This is only a PCIe Gen 3 by 4 device, but it's 2 terabytes. So plenty of storage. Memory is this G.SKILL Trident Z RGB. This is a 4x8 GB, so 32 GB in total. And this is 3600 megahertz and C16, I believe that kit is. Then to power the system, I'm using this Seasonic Focus PX850. This is 80 plus platinum, so that will give us all the juice we need to power this system. I always like to start a build by getting as much installed into the motherboard as possible before installing the board inside the case. So I always like to install the CPU first, install memory as well. I always like to see all 4 DIMMs populated as well. That always looks good. Always at this point as well, it's good to install your M.2 drives. And this Corsair one, we're going to just remove the heatsink from it. So just pull the tabs back. That just releases the heatsink. It all slides apart. Just leaves you with the bare drive. So that's the PCIe Gen 4 drive. We'll install that in the first slot. And then we can put the stock MSI heat spreader back on. And then our Kioxia XG6P drive, we'll install this in the bottom slot. This one's actually retained in the socket by the heat spreader screw. I also like to try and get as much of the CPU cooler mounting hardware installed, or even the CPU cooler installed as well. I noticed with this CoreLiquid S360 you get the Intel backplate. It comes with the top mounting bracket for Intel installed to the CPU block. We're obviously using AMD, so I'll be switching that over. Also comes with the Intel 115X LJ1200 standoffs. It also comes with AM4 standoffs, and I noticed that MSI has included an Intel LJ1700 standoff kit as well, so that's good to see that MSI is including that. That'll be handy when Intel launches Alder Lake, whenever that's going to be. So it's nice to see that that's already included. For the AM4 mounting, we just need to remove the stock AM4 bracket from the motherboard. Then we need to install the AM4 standoffs. With this 360 AIO, I'm going to have to install it in the front, because if I install it in the top, we can't really test the thermal performance with this solid top cover on, because obviously it's just going to block all the airflow. So if I install it in the front, ideally, I want it with the tubes at the bottom, but that's not going to work. So I'm going to have to install it with the tubes at the top, something like that. Steve from Gamers Nexus isn't going to be happy, but there's no other way I can do it, I'm afraid. I think we'll probably install the CPU block to the motherboard once we've got the motherboard inside the case, I think, because I might have to mess around a bit with the orientation, because I don't really want the tubes to be blocking that IPS display once the system's running. So put the motherboard in. It doesn't come with a lot of accessories, this case. It does come with like a small bag with some screws and things in, and a few zip ties for cable management. In this bag though, there should be some screws for the motherboard. I'm just going to check which size it is, because they can either be the fine or coarse thread. Looks like they're the fine thread screws. Installing the motherboard was easy, so that means that everything lines up, such as the motherboard standoffs. They all seem to line up nicely. Rear I/O cutout, that looks good. I'm starting to like the look of this build. It's got a real like stealthy dark look to it, which always looks nice. I've started installing the AIO at the front, and I only have to remove the outer panel and this dust filter. You don't have to take all the front panel off to be able to get to the 120mm screws. 140mm screws, they might be a little bit tight, but I think you can still get to them without taking this full panel off. So just gonna tighten up the rest of those screws. I think there's one more to put in, so just tighten those up, and then that's the AIO installed. Now these other 3 Silent Gale P12 fans that I've got, I always was thinking that I'd install them either at the top or in the front, depending where the AAO goes, but it's going to be a bit pointless installing them at the top while ever you've got the this panel on, this solid panel. But what I might do is install them anyway there, and you could always have them set into the 0 RPM mode while ever you've got this solid panel installed. And then if you found that you're doing some real intense workload or under like a gaming load, you need a bit of extra airflow, you can always take that top panel off and then just use the MSI sensor software and kick these fans in. So I'll install them anyway, and yeah, get on with the rest of the build. So I just opened up the box for these Silent Gale P12, and you get an extension cable in there. I think that's like 300mm long. You also get a couple of options for mounting these fans. You can either use the normal really coarse threaded fan screws, or you get a little pack here as well with some like plastic clips that are tool free installation, so you don't need any screwdriver with those. You just put on a little rubber and then push the clip in, and that holds the fan in place. I think I'll probably use the fan screws because I'll be taking this system apart not long after this video is finished. And sometimes I found that these clips, they can be a little bit awkward. Sometimes they break as well when you take them out. So I'll use the screws for this installation. And I'm going to set all these fans as exhaust as well. So I'll be blowing out, exhausting air from the top of the case. I don't know whether you can see as well on the top of this case where the ventilation is for the fans or for a top mounted AO. It's pushed as far forward as possible, which is usually good because that usually allows you a little bit of extra clearance if you are installing a radiator, especially if you're going like pull push with the fans. It leaves you a bit of extra clearance to like the VRM heat sinks and stuff like that. So it's alright. Sometimes when you've got the fans as far forward as possible as well, it makes it easier to get into like your top EPS power connector and your CPU fan headers and things like that. So this CPU block orientation, I'm going to have it facing that way, so these tubes, they'll not be interfering with the display. So I've already fitted the AM4 bracket that just twists off the old Intel bracket, and the AM4 bracket goes in place. Install 4 thumb screws, just to install these like finger tight first. And once all 4 are in place, I just like to tighten these up evenly from corner to corner. That just makes sure that you kind of get an even spread of pressure when you're installing the CPU block, and it spreads the thermal compound out nicely. No need to apply any thermal compound to this CPU block because it's already pre-applied from the factory. Give those a final nip up with the screwdriver. And then cable management with this, we've got plenty of cables to sort out. So there's one that connects up to the fans on the radiator. I'll just pass that through the top grommet and then connect those up at the back of the motherboard tray. This CPU fan header, I'll connect that to the CPU fan header on the motherboard, and then just pass the excess cable around the back again through that grommet. Now this SATA cable, it's quite long actually. On some of these AAOs it's not as long as this, so you generally have to route it down here and maybe through one of these grommets. This one's quite long though, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this up and through that same cutout and same grommet as the other cables. I think that way it'll look a bit neater, all the cables going up in the same direction. Same with this USB cable as well, that's nice and long, so you'll send that up there as well. Just try and neaten it up as much as possible. It's not easy to get some of these AOs looking neat when they've got so many cables, but I think it does look better when they all can go up in the same direction rather than trailing in different directions around the memory and things like that. So that should look alright when it's done. And then just see if this top cover still fits. That still fits, but it does slightly limit how far you can move those tubes down. But I still think it looks alright. So we've got no hard drives to install, no 2.5 or 3.5 inch drives, so it's the power supply installation next. I know I'm going to need a 24 pin cable. I also need just one PCIe cable for the graphics card that we're using. So I'll plug that in. 1 EPS power. I think it's just a single 8-pin EPS on this motherboard. So I'll plug that in, and I'm hoping I'll get away with this SATA power cable with just 2 SATA connections, and it's not a very long one, so I should be able to hide the excess quite easily. So that's the minimum amount of cables hopefully needed. Power supply slots into this case from the side, and then as usual screw it in place from the back. So it's starting to take shape, and I think it's also starting to look good as well in here. We've got motherboard, CPU, memory, M.2 drives installed, AO at the front, CPU blocks installed, 3 fans up at the top, rear exhaust fan that was pre-installed but I've disconnected it from the fan controller and I'll be connecting that up to the motherboard. Power supply is installed, so just need to do some tidying up of the cables, connect everything up round the back, and then install the graphics card. Right, so the build's finished. I think it's looking really damn nice actually. It's got a real like stealthy dark look to it with all the black parts, and then the dark grey accents on the motherboard. Really sets it off. I'm really happy with how that's done. Could have probably got away without running any RGB in this system to, you know, stick with that stealthy look, but with the RGB built in the case, I've just set it to like a purple colour to match the colour on the CPU block display, so it doesn't look bad, but I reckon it would have looked good without any RGB at all. Also, with the LED button on the top of the case, you can switch through various different RGB patterns and colours, such as rainbow effects. Solid colours as well, you can switch between various different solid colours. There's absolutely loads to choose from. If you open up the MSI sensor software and open the CoreLiquid, in here you can configure what comes up on the display on the CPU water block. So you can have it as a hardware monitor, and you can choose different things to display, such as the CPU temperature, frequency, different fan speeds, GPU information, liquid temperature as well, which is useful to see. You could also have a video playing on there if you want. Or you can also have a customized message or a banner that scrolls across the display. or you could put the time on there. Or you could even have live weather reports on your CPU block display. I'm going to switch back to the hardware monitor because I think that one's probably the most useful for me. You can also change the fan settings as well in the MSI Center software. There are some preset profiles such as silent, balanced, game mode, and if you want you can also customize your own fan curve if you prefer. Building a system inside this case was fine, no real problems at all. Everything lined up, installing the motherboard, standoffs all lined up, the rear I/O lined up well, installing the graphics card, there's no problem with the fit, same with the power supply. Cable management around the back as well, plenty of space there, easy to manage cables, especially when you've got a system like ours that's not got any drives or 2.5-inch SSDs. So I don't really have any issues with how it is to build a system inside. Got one or two niggles with this case, but it's kind of like outweighed by the good points. So I like the premium features such as the hinged tempered glass side panel. Makes it nice and easy if you just want to get in and maybe swap out an M.2 drive, or if you want to upgrade graphics cards, you're not fiddling about with screws to get the side panel off. Also this bit of brushed aluminium on the side here as well, that looks well. This is actually brushed aluminium, it's not just some plastic that's made to look like it. And it's also quite a nice looking case as well, really. It's got quite understated looks with this solid front panel, often with like vented front panels. They can be quite fiddly and not as nice to look at. I think overall it's a nice looking case. Build quality overall seems alright, it's pretty sturdy. All the side panels and front panels fit on pretty well, but there are one or two things that I have minor issues with, such as the vent on top of the power supply shroud. You can see straight in, and if there's any like, you know, messy cables or anything like that in there, you can see them. I prefer to have like a solid power supply shroud. The overall build quality alright, but this front panel, sometimes when you take it off, it brings the dust filter with it like it just did then. This dust filter is meant to be held in and clipped in at the top, but it's not a great fit. Whether that's just this sample or whether it's like it on all of them, I'm not sure. So that's something that could have been a little bit better as well. This fan switch that I mentioned on the top earlier, I made a bit of a mistake actually. I said it's a 3-stage switch, 50, 70 to 100%. It's actually 3 stages, so it's 0%, so fans turned off, 70% speed, and then 100%. And I feel like the 70%, it's a bit aggressive. When you turn it up to 70%, the fans are quite loud. I think it could have probably done with being maybe 50% or even lower, especially since this is like a low noise focus case as well. So I think MSI could have gone a bit more conservative with that fan switch and just had a lower RPM on the first stage. But overall it's not bad. It's nice to build a system inside and it looks good. And this package as a whole, so the case, cooler and the fans, no matter how you got this case configured, so whether you've got these silent panels fitted or whether you've got them removed, system runs really quiet. I ran a couple of thermal performance tests with the case in the different configurations. So in its default configuration with all the panels fitted, tempered glass side panel fitted, and then I ran a second test with these top and front silent panels removed just to see what difference it makes in terms of noise and in terms of the thermal performance. So what I did is each time I ran a Cinebench R23 30 minutes, so that stressed the CPU. I didn't want to introduce any GPU load because I didn't want the potential noise from the GPU affecting the results. And as you can see, there's virtually nothing in it in terms of temperature, whether you've got the case in its default configuration or whether you've got the silent panels removed. Same goes for the noise levels as well. MSI suggests you use the silent fan profile in the MSI Center software, which we did, and whether the case was in its default configuration or with the silent panels removed, we could barely get the noise level above the noise floor or the ambient noise level in the room. So it seems to be doing its job pretty well, this case, or at least this case and the cooler and the fans all together as a kit. I think there's still plenty of airflow even though we've got this solid front. These top and side vents seem to give enough airflow as well. As you saw, the temperatures of the 5600X, they were really low actually, and so I think the case is working well. So yeah, overall it's a really nice bit of kit, really good cooler, great looking fans, very quiet, good case to build a system inside as well. Thanks for watching, I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you want to help support Kitguru, go to our store and pick up some merch, or you could even subscribe to our Patreon And as always, if you want to catch up on the in-depth technical reviews, head over to the website.